Welcome back. The Republic of Korea votes to replace impeached President Park Geun-hye. The election has revealed deep divisions among the population over priorities and politics. So let's get to that with this portion of the show. From Massachusetts, we have Myung-Koo Kang. He is a political science professor at New York's Baruch College. From Beijing, we have Qinduo Xu. He is a political analyst for China Radio International. And with us in the studio is Eland. He is director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. Obviously, let's start in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Myung-Koo Kang, where is the polling right now in terms of the candidates? And are we likely to see a big change in policy when it comes to the new government in ROK, especially towards the north and, of course, its big US ally?
Right. So far, the front runner, Moon Jae-in, he got 42%. So he's been the front runner for the past couple of months. So he's going to be quite strong candidate at the moment. And then another two candidates, their polling rate is about 16 to 18%. So the front runner, Moon Jae-in, has double ahead of other two strong candidates. So that's the current situation.
Let me follow up.
Okay.
Sorry, let me follow up with that. How much has the comments of US President Donald Trump helped his position over the last few days? Because he talked about charging the Republic of Korea $1 billion for the deployment of the THAAD missile system. He also said perhaps we should renegotiate the free trade deal.
Right.
And also South Koreans were a little upset about the aircraft carrier that was meant to be steaming towards the peninsula and ended up being thousands of kilometers away going in the other direction. This has become a sort of referendum, hasn't it, on US security alliance where it wasn't before?
Right, exactly. So the current situation is that according to the popular public poll, more than 90% of South Korean people think that the United States should pay the cost, thought related cost. And at the same time, many people are really upset about Calvin's incident. And then another thing is that even those people who strongly support THAAD deployment or strengthening U.S. ROK alliance, but they still think that United States should pay the cost more, not South Korea should pay more to other military purposes. So right now, I think Korean people are a little bit upset about so-called Korea passing. So the U.S. government, particularly the Trump administration, does not necessarily respect Korean people's opinion and Korean people's independence. And then many Korean people seem to think that the Korean government should take more initiative in dealing with the North Korean nuclear crisis.
Well, that's interesting. Let me pick up on that with Qingdu in Beijing, because China are obviously closely watching this election too. And if the Moon Jae-in, the more left of center candidate, is elected, isn't that more in line with sort of China's thinking? Obviously, there has been some tensions with the deployment of THAAD. Also, the left thinking of bringing back some element of the sunshine policy, opening talks with the DPRK. Would China be happy with that result? Although no one interferes in sovereign nations' elections, of course.
Well, whoever will be the new president, that doesn't make a big difference in terms of China-South Korea relationship. South Korea is a small country compared with the big neighbors like China, the United States, the alliance, and the relationship with North Korea probably will remain thorny. But Mr. Moon Jae-in obviously is, in a sense, is preferred because of, you mentioned the sanction policy from the previous administration. Yes, he was in the government of the previous administration, which, adopted the sanction policy. So he's supposed to be more flexible in terms of dealing with North Korea, such as maybe starting talks or investment, or to improve the relationship with North Korea in order to solve the problem. So that's also similar to a way of China dealing with North Korea. So in that sense, I think it would be good for Beijing to see Mr. Moon to be elected.
Ivan, let's take a look at this from the US perspective, because Donald Trump's made some interesting comments. I went through some of them, but he also questioned Kim Jong-un's sanity one day and then about a couple of days later said he was a very smart cookie. He'd be happy to meet him if the circumstances were right. Where is U.S. policy on the DPRK, and how much is it affecting, feeling in the region, do you think, especially with the ROK elections coming up?
Well, I think the U.S. policy is bipolar, and that's what one day it's one thing, and the other day it's sunshine, which is the sunshine policy. If you're going to meet with the leader, you expect that from a South Korean leader of the liberal bent, but you don't expect it from any president of the United States. So that's very stark. And of course, this row about who's going to pay for the THAAD, the U.S. already agreed to pay for it, so that we need to do that. But and I think Trump goes askew by let sleeping dogs lie. Now I think Trump is right on one thing, and that is that in the overall relationship, I think South Korea needs to start doing more. It has 40 times the GDP of the North, and it can do more for its own defense in the overall scheme of things.
Okay, Myung-Koo Kang, do you want to put up on that? Should the ROK be doing, quote, more?
In terms of sharing the cost, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big Donald Trump policy, whether you're in Asia or Europe. He wants allies to pay more for their defense.
Right. I think that'll be tough, but let me jump on that sunshine policy issue, engagement.
Yeah, sure.
At the front, current frontrunner Moon Jae-in made it quite clear that once he got elected, he wants to strengthen U.S.-Korean alliance. But of course, he will try to reconciliate. He tried to make more inter-Korea diplomatic or some talks. But his priority I think his priority will be placed on strengthening U.S.-ROK alliance, and that's very important because conservative group of people, their influence in the Korean politics is very strong. So, for instance, the frontrunner Moon Jae-in, his popular vote did not exceed 45% so far.
Right.
So at the moment, it's a quite critical issue whether he can get elected with 50% of popular vote, majority vote of the Korean people. So he needs to take into account those conservative groups in the domestic politics, and one of the important agenda is the strengthening U.S.-ROK alliance. And based on the strong U.S.-ROK alliance, he's going to gradually pursue some reconciliation with the North Korean regime. So I think the negotiation of more cost sharing would be tough, but I think the cost sharing will not disrupt the existing U.S.-ROK alliance relationship.
Qinduo, do you think after the elections, perhaps China and the ROK can find better relations? The deployment of THAAD has created some popular opinion in China, which has led to boycotts of certain goods, certain brands, especially the property company where THAAD is now based on a golf course there. Do you think there's an opportunity to calm things down in terms of how the deployment has affected relations?
Yes, I do think so. I think with the election of the new president, that will create an opportunity for the two countries to amend their relationship here, which is obviously disrupted by this THAAD system installment over there. So this is basically one of the priorities of the new president to improve its relationship with China. And for the Chinese side, of course, this also provides a chance basically to take another look at the relationship with South Korea, how to maintain the strong relationship at the same time to reduce the threat of the THAAD system to the Chinese national security. I think it do provide a good chance for the two countries to somehow reset their relationship here.
Ivan, obviously it's being watched around the region, especially Japan, the ROK elections, another US ally as well. What do you think is at stake in terms of the US's reputation in terms of this election? Some perhaps unfairly are saying, well, if a left of center candidate is voted in, it shows a rejection of the Trump policies that we've seen up to date. And of course, Japan very much sort of seem to be closer with this new Trump administration.
Yeah, I think Japan is closer to the Trump administration, and a left-leaning candidate in Korea might be seen as a repudiation of Trump, although there's been so much turmoil in
and Abe, maybe.
Yes, and Abe as well. But I think there's been so much turmoil in South Korea as a result of the scandal and the demise of the last leader there that I think that will be deflected a little bit. But yes, I think to some extent a leftist candidate in winning the election might be seen as a repudiation to some extent of Trump's policy.
Myung-Koo Kang, I should have asked this earlier, but obviously the DPRK issue is very important. But what else is this election about for the ROK? It's a dynamic economy, but the economy's not great. The voting public have been riled up by the impeachment scandal and found a people power a little bit. And the population's getting younger. What are the internal dynamics? What we should look for as outsiders?
The current presidential election is quite critical. I mean, we can think of major three aspects. In terms of political aspect, South Korean people were really proud of its democratization. South Korea achieved a rapid democratization based on really peaceful way from the late 1980s. But somehow this impeachment, through this impeachment process, South Korean people felt that frustrated, really frustrated and angry. And then South Korean democracy is not substantively improved at all. So in terms of consolidating democracy, this presidential election will be a very important turning point. Another thing is that in terms of economic aspect, South Korea achieved remarkable economic success, as we know well. And since the early 1990s, South Korea tried to develop, post-catch-up development strategies, liberalizing its economic system. But somehow, this liberalizing economic system has resulted in aggravating income and wealth inequality. And then the majority of the Korean people think that they don't belong to the middle class at all. So how to recover the middle class and then come up with the Korean-style next catch-up stage in economic development strategies, that's very important. Well, another thing is that the social dimension. Now, as you point out, briefly, the younger generation and older generation and generational conflict, not only in dealing with North Korean issue, but at the same time dealing with economic issues and political issues. So generational conflict is quite real and important. So this new leadership or this election would be very important for the next stage of Korean development.
Thanks so much. I want to just put one more story in here because it really captures the headlines, not just in China, but also around the world. And that's China's new jetliner. Can we bring up some pictures of the C919? Had its first maiden flight. And it really is being seen as a competitor to potentially to Airbus and Boeing's Western monopoly on aviation. Qinduo, where you sit in Beijing, is this a game changer for the aviation industry, or is it early days?
Well, it's definitely early days. I think ultimately, probably it will create some more competition because if you look at the cost of the C919, currently it's about barely half of the cost of Boeing or Airbus in similar types of plane. So, China still enjoys the so-called population bonus, basically a low-cost labor force here. So it could be competitive given that, it goes through this safety test and the certification process in European countries and the United States and other countries. So at least in the China market, it will be pretty competitive. I think gradually it will go to other countries, the rest of the world. So that's supposed the process for the C919 to go through. I think people do have confidence in that.
That's right, and there's more and more Chinese travel for the first time as well. It's going to be a booming industry in that area. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. That's all we have time for.